way you could effectively deal with the problem without disrupting all of society. Now, what I find interesting today is that we had one attack, admittedly a big attack.
A huge attack.
A huge attack. And the government has gotten so much mileage out of this that it's changed American society, and it doesn't look like it's going to, stop. That's the problem. I mean, it's been almost 4 years now, and what you've got is a sort of permanent state of siege, and you've got this huge bureaucracy with the Department of Homeland Security, and the irony is that the big problem, was too many bureaucracies. So how do we solve the problem? Well, let's have an even bigger bureaucracy. And there you are.
The bureaucracy to end all bureaucracy.
You're right. You're right. You're right.
So. Which, of course, leads to the next biggest bureaucracy. On top of that, now what you're saying that according to the history of terrorism,
yes.
They're going to use this tactic once, and then once we're ready for it, they're going to stop using it.
There's an old phrase in special operations which goes back to Sun Tzu over 2,000 years ago. Make a noise in the east, strike in the west. You attack in one way, you get everybody thinking, we'll defend against that attack again, and then you attack in some new way. One of the things about the 9/11 attack is I don't think you could do it again even if you wanted to. Why? It required just too many things to happen in the right way. And if someone had told me back when I was at the Special Warfare Center, you're going to get a bunch of guys to hijack 4 airplanes at the same time and then crash them into 4 strategic targets, I said that's impossible. Something's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong.
Right.
So they got really, really lucky. And it's doubtful they can get that lucky again. Especially today, everybody is kind of alert to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
people on the airplane would just would no longer be, the advice before was that if you're going to hijack the plane, if someone has bad enough breath, they would say, okay, we'll take you where you want to go. Wait them out. Now we know better. So as on one of the planes, the people figured out that they're going to try to crash this plane and attack them, and that's what would happen now.
Right, and also you got to look at the fact that you have better communications, like with cell phones and such. If something's happening on an airplane, someone can get on their cell phone, call the ground, figure out, well, what is it we should be doing now?
Right.
So you've got, again, a completely different situation here.
So what should we be doing? What really should we be doing to fight this war? Well,
ideally, you see, terrorism...
Is it a war? I mean, this is something that's always been going on. We fight espionage with counter-espionage, and this has happened during World War II. During World War II, there were German soldiers coming to the U.S. in submarines who learned complete English, and they gave them American clothes, and they were coming to the United States to prepare to start to do espionage
and sabotage
in the United States. But they were caught, and they were executed in a military tribunal. And there were 2 submarines full of these people. So we were able to fight the Nazis and the communists who were doing these same kind of things then.
And with a huge armed force behind them.
Right, with an actual country behind them. And now, for some reason, we're not.
Okay. Well,
that's what they're telling us.
Right. Well, it's an interesting point because if you look at through the whole history of the U.S., through all of military history, you've always had these low-level operations. We had the war against the Barbary pirates in the first part of the 19th century, where we went out there and we, conducted limited operations to take out, the pirates in North Africa. So this sort of stuff has always gone on. In fact, one of the big staples of pulp fiction of the 20s and 30s was, fighting communist or Nazi saboteurs, which whether or not that actually happened, but the fact is that these things were always recognized to be happening at a low level, so you deal with them at a low level. It used to be called low-intensity conflict. Now, today, a huge production is being made out of it. Why? Well, to sound cliche, it's the only war we've got. We have this great big attack on September 11th, 2001. Okay. This has created so much mileage for the government because they are now able to claim that the next attack could be even bigger. Now, I will grant there has been one significant change. And the change was that terrorism kind of ran out of steam by the late 1970s. Why? Because it was been defeated. Everybody knew how to deal with it.
We developed strategies to deal with it.
What happened is that terrorists, again, I use that term in quotes, terrorists were looking to create a spectacular, and that was the term that was used. And the thought was, okay, they'd get a weapon of mass destruction, like a small atom bomb, and blow up something really big. And the other threat that they were concerned about was cyber war, that they would go out there and, crash all the air traffic control towers by spreading viruses. Well, when this hit, nobody was really prepared for it, at least psychologically. And so this did create a major change in how we thought. But even then, it's like, okay, it's one big attack, yes, but it hasn't happened again. The terrorist
act. That actually did happen? They actually tried to take down the computer structure of the...
Well, there's a lot of theory about that it's called, the military calls it cyber war.
Uh-huh.
And that the terrorists were going to use cyber war to crash some critical target. And there's some, you see, it's hard to tell because, for example, people are always trying to crack into the Pentagon's or the CIA's computers, and sometimes they succeed. And so you never know where these attacks are coming from, and that's why there's a lot of concern. And the irony is we had all this talk about, the year 2K virus, remember that.
Turned out to be nothing.
Right. So it's hard to say. But this goes on every day. Cyber war goes on every day. In fact, the military has organized units which do nothing else but take on computer viruses and hackers. But the real concern today, of course, is that what if the terrorists get control of an atom bomb or a biological weapon, and then there's a real threat. But none of this is going to be met by crashing around the world with conventional forces. What would be needed is a good intelligence. Okay. Also, what would be needed is some common consensus on how to fight this. I think one of the things that could have been done post 9/11 is that the U.S. could have gone to the leaders of the other countries, the other big countries, and said, look, the ultimate reason for all this is all these covert operations that we've all been pulling off, all of which violate the laws of war. And since now that the Cold War is over, we have a chance here. Let's get rid of the covert operations because you have too many people running around with no accountability. So you had the whole, for example, in Afghanistan, the United States supported the Afghan resistance, but then after the war was over, effectively left them on their own. Naturally, they went off in another direction.
Right.
We would need to end all these covert operations and do everything strictly by the laws of war and get a consensus universally that you play it by the laws of war, which means no more people dressing up in civilian clothing attacking civilian targets. Unfortunately, we're not going to do that.
And the terrorists aren't going to either.
Right. So because there's no international consensus really on ending terrorism, you're not going to end terrorism. These things are going to go on all the time. The question is, how do we fight and win in this environment? I think the first rule is don't overreact, because that's exactly what they want you to do. And we have overreacted.
Yes,
We've overreacted to the point where, again, you cannot get on an airplane these days without, it'd be easier to check into county jail.
Right.
So we need to rethink our strategies altogether. There needs to be a national debate on this. Unfortunately, there isn't. What you're getting is people are too concerned with the bread and circuses, things like the Michael Jackson trial, when we ought to be discussing this every day. And again, it gets back to, one of the things I find amazing is there's no real discussion on how they actually pulled off 9/11. What was the timeline? How did they organize it? Instead, it's just treated almost as this act of God that occurred. In order to defeat the enemy, you have to understand how they operate.
And blame a group of people rather than specific people who pulled this off without the support or knowledge of even the country that we're invading now, Iraq.
Right. But that's part of the problem. The mentality after the attack was, the attack allegedly came out of the Middle East. The whole Middle East is responsible. Let's go invade the Middle East and overthrow all these countries and set up democracies, and we won't have any more terrorism. Well, it doesn't quite work that way in the real world.
I'm sure if you could force every country in the Middle East to become a democracy, and the terrorists wouldn't miss a step. How would it affect them? It wouldn't at all. The government there is one person, the government there is another person. They're not related or supported financially by those kind of networks.
You see, in many ways, what the terrorist networks are doing now is they're moving globally. They have networks that stretch across the whole world. So taking out one country doesn't really make a difference. It's in the old days you could say, okay, you had an insurgent base in a country. It's like in Vietnam, okay, the communists used Cambodia and Laos as bases. Today, it doesn't work that way. You don't have physical bases. You have these virtual bases, these networks which stretch across the whole world.
Kind of like an internet.
Definitely. And with the internet, you can communicate globally. You can operate globally.
Encoded.
Yes.
Impossible to break
And so-
any kind of code.